Bun venit la punctul de plecare. La școala de sabat, pe trimestrul acesta, avem în studiu una dintre cele mai frumoase și cele mai fascinante Evanghelia după Ioan. La început de trimestru am avut ocazia să avem o conversație cu profesorul Thomas Shepard, care este autorul materialului de studiu pentru acest trimestru. Dar astăzi avem ocazia să purtăm încă o discuție cu dr. Kendra Haloviak Valentine, care predă Teologia Noului Testament la Universitatea La Sierra, tot despre Evanghelia după Ioan. Kendra Haloviak Valentine este specialist în Evanghelia după Ioan, i-a scris o carte și pregătește și alte lucrări în domeniul acesta. Veți avea ocazia să descoperiți atât perspective recente, științifice, asupra modului de a înțelege această Evanghelie, dar și sugestii foarte simple, foarte practice, ușor de aplicat de fiecare dintre noi. Vizionare cu folos. I'm so glad to have you back.
Good to be back.
And it's again in the context of the Sabbath school, because quite unusually we have 2 quarters in a row on a biblical book. Usually they alternate a topic in the biblical book. And now not only we have 2 biblical books in a row, but they are 2 of the 4 Gospels in a row.
Amen.
Mark and John.
It's wonderful.
And Marcos, Mark, John.
Oh, John, Mark.
John, Mark.
You got me confused. Yeah, we did them in the wrong order.
Now, in fact, you have been always fascinated by the Gospel of John. What are your earliest memories? Because John is a very interesting book. Because it's the book providing the golden Bible verse, John 3:16, known by every Christian child, by heart, probably the first Bible verse they learn. On the one hand, so the simplest, the most direct, good for everyone. On the other hand, of course, the logos and all the discourses, and sometimes it sounds so esoteric, so mysterious, so difficult to grasp. It's such a book of contrasts, probably.
Well, and I think that as I was thinking of your question, I think that's probably why in Sabbath school, as a kid, I think we primarily worked with the other Gospels other than John. As I'm thinking about the stories, they're the ones in the Synoptic Gospels, not the Gospel of John. Interesting.
So, do you have what would be your earliest memory of, not let's say, setting aside John 3:16, but when you have been confronted by the complexity, the depth of this 4th Gospel?
I think it was when I was 13, and my mom was sort of discovering the idea of the grace of God in a whole new way. She was 40 at the time, and I remember a friend of ours told her to read the Gospel of John. Read maybe just 1 verse, or read 2 chapters, whatever you want to do that day, whatever you feel moved to do that day, just read the Gospel of John. And when you finish the Gospel of John, start reading it again. That's what he said to her. And it made such a difference in her life. And I saw that. I mean, we had always been Adventist Christians, don't get me wrong. It was a very much of a Christian home, but I saw her be at peace in a way that I hadn't seen before, and have the assurance of salvation. And the Gospel of John was a huge blessing to her. And so I watched that from afar, even before I started studying it closely myself.
So you were aware of the fact that she did receive that advice?
Yes.
And she told you that she's reading now the Gospel of John with this purpose?
Every morning she'd get up at 5 o'clock and read her Bible every morning, and has until just recently when she's become sick. But she spent her entire life since then, over 40 years, she has gotten up every single day and read her Bible. I have not known her to skip. If she has an appointment that's earlier, she gets up earlier. Fantastic. Yeah, no, that's been her journey, and it's just been such a blessing to her, and to all of us.
Sure.
Yes.
Some of our parents give us such a powerful legacy. And,
That's a powerful way to say it. That's such a true way of saying it.
So that was your first memory, but it was somehow indirect.
Exactly. Yeah, not direct. That's true.
What about
She was a witness.
One more personal, if I don't push you too hard.
No, that's a really good question. When I think of my academy years, high school time, I think more of Paul. And when I think of college would have been when it would happen, I think. Studying the 4 Gospels and looking at each of the 4 Gospels and studying them. It would have been my college years. And then I remember creating a class on, at that point, the 27 fundamental beliefs of the Adventist Church. I'd worked as a pastor, and I was thinking of how to share the 27 fundamental beliefs through the Gospel of John. And that's when I started really working with the Gospel of John. So I would have been 22 when I first started doing it in a systematic kind of way, more careful way, right?
What do you like the most about John?
I love it that it's about life. I love it that it's the gospel where Jesus says, I've come that they might have life and have it more abundantly. I love it that it's addressing the problem of death. So it's become even more important to me in the last year and a half after losing my dad. It is just a gospel that I hold on to with hope that that Jesus has had the victory over death and the grave, that God loves us so much that God's even willing to go into the grave, which is, I don't even know how to work that out in my head, but that is powerful. There's nowhere you and I can go where God hasn't been, even the grave. And I find that powerful. And it gives me great hope. So this is the gospel, and I've spent quite a bit of time thinking about, even wrote a little devotional book on the signs, the 7 signs that are in the first half of the book.
Yes, I'm sorry for not putting it here.
No.
I have it in my bag.
It's okay. But I just, I was blessed by that study, but I'm also being blessed in my current study of thinking through whole themes that go all the way through the gospel is what I'm working on right now.
Let's remain a little bit on the book, Signs of Life. Would you like to describe briefly that book? I plan to propose the Romanian publishing house to publish it. And would you like to introduce the book a little bit? Signs of Life. Sure. Because it's, in a way, it's an unusual book in the way it's built.
It's inviting us to think about what does it mean to journey through those 7 signs of the gospel as readers, and what are we supposed to see? Signs are very interesting. They're not called miracles for a reason. Yes. They're pointing somewhere, like a sign points. Sure. They're revealing Jesus and that he's God. So that each of those signs goes along with the prologue of the book, which is very much in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And that, yes, God becomes flesh and dwells with us, but that idea that whenever you see Jesus, you're seeing God, the best representation we have ever in all of human history of God. And so that's just this powerful way of thinking about the whole gospel, that the theology of the Gospel of John is Christology. So that is, I think, important to, as you're journeying through the signs, to not fixate on any one sign, to not just say, I've got to ask all the questions I can of this one sign. No, the sign is pointing somewhere else. It's not ever pointing to itself. It's wanting you to see Jesus in a new way, in a more accurate way. So I love that part of it. And so the book is trying to do that. It's at the end,
Yes.
it has several chapters where it's other people reflecting on their experiences with the
For
gospel.
other people,
That's
yeah.
correct.
I think all of them are from Australia.
That's correct.
And
And
I
the whole.
interviewed two of them I've interviewed.
Oh, have you really? Oh, fascinating.
Daniel Reyna and
Okay.
Mrs. Fernandez.
Oh, sure. And and really what I should give credit to Carolyn Rickett, because she's the one who had the vision of the book.
Oh.
And Nathan Brown, the editor.
I interviewed him as well.
Yes,
Three of them.
so I'm very grateful to all of those individuals for being part of the project, for having the idea of the project, for being part of it and seeing it through. And then there's also study guides in it, because it's very much for people to, we were thinking about it in terms of local churches or small house churches, people that don't have access to a larger Adventist communities or Christian communities, where you can study it together and experience it together and see what stories, what new chapters could emerge from reading it together. So that was the vision of the book.
Yeah. When was that written?
I feel like it was 2015.
15?
So it's a little dated now. I think I'm telling you right.
It's all right. Good. I thought that it was written at the time when I interviewed you last time, but you know better. So you find much spiritual nourishment for you in this gospel. There are also some challenges in this book, like what do you think in your own experience and working with generation after generation after generation of students? What do you find to be the most common challenges with this gospel, so different from the first three gospels?
One of we just finished a quarter where I had just the Gospel of John for the entire term, and there were 21 of us in the class, and it was really an exciting experience. One of my favorite experiences in teaching in my years of teaching. Really? And one of the things that many of them became intrigued by was the idea of who is the beloved disciple. Now, I know the traditional Christian answer, I know that, but it was fascinating for them to think of what they thought was the most plausible possibility. And so they got intrigued by that question. They also were very interested. I wasn't even going to spend a lot of time with this, but they just got intrigued with the man at the pool of Bethesda. Is he a character that becomes a follower of Jesus or not? And there's arguments both ways, right? There's arguments both ways. And so they just were intrigued by that. And then the third thing they were intrigued by, and then kind of changing your answer, the question, because you said what's difficult, but it's precisely because the answer to these questions is difficult that I think that they found it interesting. And then the third major question that they asked was the idea of, is chapter 21 part of the original or not? And so they wrestled with that too. Those seemed to be the times when they were the most intrigued by the problems of the text, if you will. But there were also so many moments of insight and blessing that they experienced. And I had them do journals where one side of the page was the Gospel of John and the other side was blank. And they could create artwork, they could create questions, they could create favorite passages, they could, whatever they wanted to do with that blank page, and it was really fascinating what they did with it.
It was they were to prepare their own journal, I mean, to do this layout, or it was given as part of the class?
I had them purchase the journal. It was $5.
Oh, so there is a journal.
There is a journal, and then they shared every Friday. They gave me their section that they wanted to share.
Is this something you do often with your students?
I had never tried that before, but I will in the future because it works so well.
Journaling in general.
Yes, it's a little tricky on how to do it and grade it.
Expand a little bit, because I think that's something many of us should consider. We read, we have insights, but the next day we don't remember what were those insights. Or
I've purchased actually it was a gift from my parents, the entire New Testament, each book of the New Testament individual, and you can buy it on Amazon, either as individuals or the entire New Testament. And so you take Matthew, if you want to start with Matthew, or John, whichever one you want to start with, Paul's letters, whichever one you want, Book of Revelation, and then you can just journal yourself. I highly recommend it. It's been such a blessing to me in my own devotional life.
It's on paper or electronic? On paper.
It's on paper.
I see.
And it comes as a whole set, is the set I have, but you can also get them individually. And I can't remember who's the publisher at this moment, I'm sorry, but it's, if you say journaling the New Testament. And I also know there's one on Psalms. I have the Psalm one as well. I'm not sure if they have the whole Old Testament or not.
It's just a blank page, or there are some suggestions?
There's some decorative,
decorative.
Decorative pulling out of a passage or a phrase, but not anything else. The rest is up to you.
So it's something you use?
Absolutely, personally as well as in class.
Yeah. But the space is limited, you're right? And
That's correct.
At the moment you have to stop because you have no place, and you don't use the ancient method of erasing or and writing over again and again.
It's true. It's true. However,
you can add.
Every page is another blank. So you're going to have half the book is going to be blank. So there is a lot there for you to fill in if you want.
I think that's a powerful suggestion for many people, because probably in the beginning it looks a little discouraging, but little by little the juices begin flowing, and you will be amazed at what you get out of that. Yeah.
Well, and what I've even started to do is if I go back another year, I date it, so I can see what I thought in April of 2022, and then now in 2024, what I noticed this time around. So that's fun too. Becomes in a way like a spiritual journal or a diary, but based on scripture, and I love that.
Excellent. Before beginning this conversation, you mentioned one concept, and I like to discuss that for part of this program. The notion, the idea that throughout the Gospel of John, we have some hints into what has been called secret disciples.
Yes.
Would you like to expand?
Sure.
Give some examples, but then discuss the meaning. What does it mean to us?
Sure. Probably the longest one, and as far as a space in the gospel that emphasizes this, would be the story of Nicodemus, Jesus' encounter at night, right? He comes to Jesus at night. He's a leader of the Jews. He's a Pharisee. Are those some of the reasons that he's coming to Jesus in secret, quietly at night? And so Jesus has this interaction with him. Nicodemus will show up 2 more times. He will show up in chapter 7 when the temple police are supposed to bring back Jesus arrested, but they don't. And when the Pharisees say, "How come you didn't bring him back?" they say, "No one speaks like this." And they're like, "Oh, you got to be kidding me." And
Nicodemus intervenes.
He does. He says, "We don't judge a person until they've had a proper trial, do we?" And then he gets accused of being, "Are you a Galilean?" Let me tell you, no prophet comes from Galilee, which they're actually not right about their own history, but anyway. But that kind of exchange, but he doesn't say more than that. He all focuses on process. We have a system here. We're not following that process. And then, of course, at the end of the gospel, he joins a man that's identified as a secret disciple, Joseph of Arimathea, in burying Jesus' body. And so you have these 3 times when we meet Nicodemus, and he's connected with Joseph of Arimathea, a secret disciple at the end. So it makes us wonder if he's been a secret disciple all along as well. Yeah, and there's also some hints in chapter 7 that he is. So that would be the perfect example of somebody who is trying to maybe keep a foot in both camps. He wants to continue to be a Pharisee with the Jews, but he also has come to believe there's something special happening with Jesus, and so he wants to be identified at some level with the Christian community, but not up front and out. And so it makes us wonder if at the time John's writing his gospel, were there people like that? Was John kind of identifying that kind of follower of Jesus? And is he encouraging them to come forward now? Is he encouraging them to say, you need to make a decision? Anyway, that's one of the things that I'm kind of wrestling with and thinking about at this time, because I wonder what that invitation might be for us in 2024 as we're reading the Gospel of John. And so that's one of the things I'm working on.
Do you have already some of the possible implications in mind?
Well, one of the things I really wonder about is that there's going to be a time when Jesus does something secretly. Jesus himself. His brothers are going to say, you should go to the festival and show yourself. And Jesus says no, and then after they go, he actually goes secretly, it says. He goes to is this in chapter 7? I think so. And he talks with them about this. And as he's talking with them about going secretly, he doesn't want, they say no one does their works in secret. Jesus says it's not the right time. But then he ends up going and speaking publicly. And it makes me wonder, and I'm just teasing this out, I'm just studying this right now, but I'm wondering if there's a difference between speaking publicly, speaking in the open, and that idea of deciding when's the right time for when to do that. That Jesus is, if we're following Jesus' example, he is not going to show himself until the right time, but are we called to speak truth every time? They're clearly wanting to kill Jesus. And so the question is, when your life is on the line, it does seem to be a very important thing to know the right time to put yourself in danger. Is that different than proclaiming Jesus as the Christ? And I don't know the answer yet. I'm still seeing the way the Gospel of John teases that through. Is there a tension between showing oneself to the world and openly testifying to who Jesus is the way I was writing it? How do we know when the right time comes for speaking publicly? Anyway, that's kind of what I'm wondering about by looking at the example of Jesus in the Gospel of John.
And sometimes I'd like to have a clear instructions.
Right.
1, 2, 3, check, and this is it. But in many cases, this is not the case. We are left to struggle.
And maybe there isn't a critique of Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. Maybe they're not being criticized for being secret disciples, but there's a part of me that thinks they are, and I'll tell you why. Joseph of Arimathea gets the tomb so that Jesus can he's got to be a person of means, and he can also go up to Pilate and ask for this. So this guy is some elite person, right?
Absolutely.
So he gives Jesus this tomb that's never been used, and is a tremendous thing to have his body protected in this way, rather than
exposed to,
fall from the cross and just so it's a caring for the body of Jesus. But he and Nicodemus think he's going to stay in the grave. I mean, Nicodemus has this huge pile of spices that he puts on Jesus. So there is a sense in which they're not expecting him to raise from the dead in a few days.
Absolutely.
And I think that's significant. The other thing I would say is that earlier in this gospel, in chapter 12, Mary of Bethany already anointed Jesus, and Jesus said, "You've anointed me for my burial."
Yes.
So he's already been anointed. He doesn't need another one. If you're part of the community of faith, you would know that, because you would be among these close circle of disciples. So at the very least, I think if you're a secret disciple, it's sad because you're not part of the larger community of believers. You're not experiencing the community with them. You're on your own over here, maybe with just you and Joseph of Arimathea, but you're not experiencing the community the way it was meant to be experienced. So I think that that's a tragedy of being a secret disciple, is you're not aware of what the other disciples are doing. And you're also not participating in the resurrection appearances of Jesus. You know, as Jesus appears to Mary Magdalene later in chapter 20, and then to all the disciples minus Thomas, and then to all the disciples plus Thomas, and then the 7 disciples at the Sea of Galilee. The secret disciples aren't part of any of that. How tragic. The other thing I would say is that the beloved disciple who's with Jesus at the cross, with Jesus' mother, when Jesus kind of creates this new community, take care of, this is your son, this is your mother, creating this new community that's no longer based on bloodline, but on those who have gathered around the cross. This is the new community, this is my new family. If you're a secret disciple, you're not part of that either. So it seems to me there's a tragedy in it, even if it's not a critique in the gospel itself. There's a huge loss in not being part of the out and willing to pronounce it publicly. You're missing out on a lot.
Yeah, it's a detail, but I see also Mary and the women. They have been part of the group, but they still go. They prepare the ointment on Friday night, and on Sunday early morning they go to do the same as Nicodemus.
But not in John.
Not in John?
No.
Not in John?
I don't think so. I think it's
in Luke.
I think it's in the Synoptic Gospels. Yes, absolutely, but not in John, which is interesting. Mary's going there, and you could argue maybe Mary Magdalene, is going there, or maybe she's just going there to cry. But anyway, it's just fascinating.
Your point is very, very profound, and it. On the one hand, it gives us much hope that we are not given the task to evaluate or to pass a sentence or a judgment. Who has accepted, who has not accepted, because God knows whose are His.
Amen.
Yeah, only He knows that. On the other hand, the fact that, as you said, it's tragic not to take side with Jesus. It has consequences, and it's an urge. God is urging each one of us to take a stand, even if it's unpopular. At the same time, we know that Christians in many places, in many times, have been happy to have a friendly person in positions of authority. Yeah, you understand?
It can be a help.
Yeah, it's very helpful.
You can keep your license.
And sometimes we are happy to see that they didn't take a public stand, because that would mean they would lose their official position. So to have a secret disciple of Jesus in key positions may be helpful, but of course God could provide other means for that. He's not keeping those people out in order to be a blessing for the church. He wants everyone to take a stand, as he did. Are there other stories or other persons which could be considered in this category of secret disciples?
I don't think, those are the ones that I am emphasizing at least, because I don't want to just assume others. Sure. There were a couple of times we're told about the disciples, or some are not named. The beloved disciple shows up for the first time in chapter 13, I believe. And up before then, there's sometimes called an other disciple, but he's not called the beloved disciple until 13. So unless you think it's the same person as Lazarus, who is called in the letter they send, the message the sisters send to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. And so that's Lazarus, and that's why some people wonder if Lazarus is the beloved disciple. So that's chapter 11. But those are the two I'm working with primarily, just to kind of go with what the text actually says. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I was just going to say one other thing. It just hit me just now, so I haven't teased it out with my study, but it just hit me that when you're the secret disciples, Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea, you only are dealing with a dead body. But in the garden, think about all the echoes of creation, right? In the garden, Mary Magdalene thinks Jesus is a gardener, and in a way he is, because he has been the one that has created all things, right? He has done all the landscaping, if you will, right? And so even though she's mistaken, she's also right in a profound way, and we're back in Eden, and now it's recreation. And so I just love all beautiful. That. And if you're not a secret disciple, if you're willing to not be a secret disciple, you're going to experience life, not just death. And of course, that theme of creation has been going on since the very first verse, right? In the beginning. So the echoes of creation are all the way through the Gospel of John. It's one of the things, as I said at the very beginning of this program, how much I love that idea of life and creation and recreation. And also, I would say there's ways of thinking about it, not just in the obvious echoes to creation that you have at the beginning of this gospel, but you also have two times when Jesus, I would say Jesus as God, gets back into the dust and recreates someone. He does so with the woman caught in adultery in chapter 8, getting into the dust and recreating her. And then he does so with the man born blind in chapter 9, getting into the dust and recreating a human so that he can see. So I love that idea of the creation theme that goes throughout the Gospel of John.
May I come with another, what I consider a challenge with this Gospel? Typically John starts with a story, but doesn't dwell too much on the story, because he goes on a conversation.
Yes.
And many times the conversation is followed by a discourse. Now, the discourses have their challenges, but I find more challenging the conversations, because quite often my perception is that people come asking something, and when Jesus answers, we'd expect an answer to clarify or to bring light, or and most of the time the answers leave you more puzzled than before. Starting with, let's say, with Nicodemus. This man comes and expects to have a conversation, maybe like this one, or to ask questions, to get answers. I'm going to think on that. That's interesting, whatever. And Jesus, all of a sudden, you have to be born again. And the man is shocked and reacts in an almost childish way. Such a dignified person to reverse to a childish conversation is quite humiliating. And this happens again and again. What I perceive as a disconnect between questions and answers. And quite often we make sense of the answers of Jesus, but not very much in the context of the questions. We treat them as separate. But it's quite hard, for me at least, to connect the two. Have you been puzzled by that sometimes?
Yes, and I think though that every single example in the Gospel of John is to lead us to better understand Jesus. So regardless of what the question is, the answer is going to lead us to a better understanding of who Jesus is. So I think that's one of the things. The other thing that scholars have talked about that might be helpful is the idea of a two-level drama. That is that we're having the conversation with the actual historical person interacting with Jesus, and that's going on at one level. But at another level, the gospel is dealing with people in John's day. So it's not just this one level, it's a two-level drama going all the way through. And that's, for me, really helpful with this interaction with Nicodemus, because, for example, after he has that strange interaction about being born from above, born again, you can translate it both ways, right? That idea, and clearly Jesus wants him to understand the above part. After that, after sort of concluding in verse 15, when you get to the famous John 3:16, many people wonder if Jesus at that point is really talking to John's community living at the end of the first century, and he's shifted. He goes into example, uses the word we, you wonder is Nicodemus even still around, or is this John speaking with Jesus' voice to the believing community, so that he can be addressing some of the concerns of their day. So I think that's super helpful as you go through the dialogues. Here's another one.
Yes.
I probably don't have this as clear in my head, but when Jesus is interacting with the woman of Samaria, and he's having this interaction with her, and it's the longest conversation he has with anybody in the Gospel of John, which I think is really exciting and remarkable. But that conversation, I would say there's also a possible other layer going on, and it could be that people in John's day are starting to evangelize Samaritans. And so suddenly you have a dual drama going on. It's Jesus interacting with one woman and also her town, but it's also Christians saying, can Samaritans be part of the family of God? And deciding they can be. To follow Jesus faithfully is to say yes to evangelizing the Samaritans, so that they're becoming part of the Christian community. So I think you could go all the way through the gospel like that. It makes it complex, but it also is a fascinating way of thinking about the Gospel of John.
In the same line of reasoning, can we explain in this way the instances when John is interpolating, saying that he was referring to, I can't use exactly the words of the Bible, but John is doing that from time to time. He was referring to this, or he was speaking about that. He was also, would that be also a kind of John's dialogue with his readers?
I think so. Yeah. The one that's used the most, the example that's used the most, and it's been debated, but is the idea in chapter 9 where the man and his parents, the blind man and his parents, are afraid of being thrown out of the synagogue. Was that something that Jewish Christians in John's day were afraid of being thrown out of the synagogue? And so it's more relevant in that sense, less relevant to Jesus' day as it is to John's day. So that would be another example. But you're right, there are these lengthy monologues or soliloquies where Jesus is speaking in an extended way. And you begin to say, wait, I lost the storyline, right? Because it goes on for so long. But I think that each one of them is absolutely powerful in what it's saying about who Jesus is. Absolutely powerful. And I have a couple of examples for that, if I can. Sure. Chapters 5 and 8 are two examples where Jesus has an interaction with people, and then he goes into this lengthy monologue, sometimes interacting with people for a few moments, but for the most part, he's speaking. And chapter 5 is after the healing of the man at the pool of Bethesda, and he begins to be challenged because he's healed on the Sabbath. And then he says, I can heal on the Sabbath because my Father and I work on the Sabbath. And they go, now it's so much worse than healing on the Sabbath. Now you're blasphemy, right? Because you're calling yourself equal with God. And so he then goes into a lengthy monologue about this. And he talks about how he has all these different entities are witnesses to him. Well, he is using the language of a trial, where you have a witness in a court of law. So some people have worked with this idea, and I want to mention especially a Bible scholar named Andrew Lincoln, because he's done such important work on this very topic. That idea that there are trials of Jesus long before we get to Annas and Ananias and Annas and Caiaphas and Pilate. Long before we get there, we have trials. Chapter 5 and chapter 8 are the two best examples. And so if you begin to look with that set of eyeglasses on, it is really powerful that you're seeing Jesus as on trial and defending himself in a variety of ways before these trial scenes. And suddenly it begins to make sense. These lengthy monologues by Jesus start to make a lot more sense in that context. And what Andrew Lincoln has done is he has said that in the book of Isaiah, especially chapters 40 and on, in the book of Isaiah, you have 8 different trials between chapters 40 and 55, 8 different trials of God. God is on trial in Isaiah. And it is unbelievable how many of the words that come through in those trials show up in these trials of Jesus. And so it's another way of underscoring, if you know those trials of God in Isaiah, you're seeing that Jesus is now on trial as God in the Gospel of John. And it is just really something. I highly recommend it. The book is called Truth on Trial. It's not an easy read in the sense that it is scholarly, but it is such an exciting study of the Gospel of John through Isaiah 40 through 55. And saying, okay, is the Gospel of John reworking the trials of God in Isaiah, but now it's Jesus who's on trial? It's really something.
It could be that even the people listening to Jesus, the Jews, as John says, were also aware or perceiving that it was kind of a trial, because on some situations Jesus says, you are after me to kill me. And they say, you are crazy. Who is going to do that? So apparently they perceive that Jesus behaves as on trial.
And do you know that at one point in the narrative, I could look it up, at one point in the narrative, the crowd says, where's that man that they're trying to kill? Which confirms that they really are, right? So it's a fascinating way of the narrator saying, Jesus isn't crazy. He's actually being, they are threatening his life. And I believe it happens after that, after the healing of the man at the pool. I believe that's the first time where they start to plot Jesus' death, is at chapter 5, which is fairly early on in the gospel when you think about it, to be plotting it all the way through.
Several years ago, I also explained for myself, and sometimes in preaching or in a different another option, like let's say in chapter 12, the second half of chapter 12, and when the so-called Greeks came to know Jesus, and Andrew and
Is it Philip?
Philip, yes, the two disciples with Greek names. They went to announce Jesus, and he comes to them, and all of a sudden Jesus starts a very unusual, unexpected, not unusual, unexpected discourse, and he says, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified." And it's quite unexpected, because maybe they would expect, a friendly conversation. Hello, how are you? Well, we are fine. How do you find Jerusalem? And, this small talk maybe leading to something else, but a little bit of small talk before that. And Jesus all of a sudden says that the hour has come. And probably, I can imagine people looking at each other, what is this man speaking about? And the explanation I gave to myself is that Jesus, with his authority and clear vision, sees the meaning of what's happening there. Their eyes cannot see beyond the visible, but his eyes see beyond of that, the meaning of what's happening there. And what was the meaning? It was of the proximity of the cross, and he knows that, especially with those Greeks, for those Greeks there was just one chance to be able to know and to follow Jesus, for Jesus to die for them and to demolish the dividing wall between Jews and Greeks. And so as a result of his death, they will be able to follow him and to join the community. So God, let's go forward I know it will be suffering, I know it will be terrible, but that is the way for you to be glorified. Let's move on. They don't understand anything probably, or very little, but Jesus speaks on the significance, prophetic significance of that moment.
And many people, many Bible scholars see this as the very turning point of the whole gospel. That up till now you've had these signs that have been shared in small communities, but this is the point where the whole world is coming to Jesus. If I'm lifted up, will draw all people to myself. So he's headed to the cross, and this is the hour. You know how we've said, my hour is not yet come, my hour is not, it's here. It's here. And even though he's going to have a farewell discourse with his disciples, 13 through 17, it's still, this is the hour. It's come. It's come. From here on out, it's kind of like the hour is this extended hour through the rest of the gospel.
So toward the conclusion, trying to bring different ideas up, what would you suggest? What would be your recommendations to our viewers? Of course, they don't go taking a college course on John or literary devices in John or anything like that. They read their Bible with their own eyes and with two knees to put down and to pray. What would be your recommendations when they are puzzled by this apparent disconnect between questions and answers, things like that, to sum up?
Well, it's a good question, and I think for me what has been the most helpful is to not only have my Bible, but to print it out on pieces of paper, to print out all the Gospel of John. That's what I have here. And then what I do, and I try to either work with the original language, the Greek, or if you can't read the Greek, which is the majority of us, is to get the very best you can get by way of translation. For English speakers, in my opinion, that's the New Revised Standard Version. And it's not just my opinion, it's because it's making use of the best manuscripts that are available today. And so any Bible that has new in front of it and version, the New International Version, the New Revised Standard Version, the New King James Version, all of those are very good. They're taking use of that. So for English speakers, that's where I teach, and so that's what I use. And then what you do then, and you have to be careful, but I underline with color coding the same words. It is so helpful to begin to see, wow, this is a section that just keeps talking about light. This is a section that keeps talking about the world. This is a section that keeps talking about testifying. This is a and you keep going through and it just begins to pop out. So for me, just doing that Bible study has been so helpful. Getting very cheap. You can print this off with no trouble, and you can then get a couple of different colored pencils. Very simple, but then you begin to see things hit you and say, wow, I think I had that word in chapter 2. Am I right? And you go back, yes, that's highlighted in chapter 2. And it begins, and then it makes sense also of the discourses and the sections holding together better when you can see the chain of words that are being repeated. So that would be one of my suggestions.
Very, very good, very practical and simple and rewarding.
And I just have to say, because I've just finished this study, I have just finished a book on the Gospel of John that has been a huge blessing in my own life. It's not a Seventh-day Adventist. He's very much a Christian, though. His name is Wes Howard Brooke. And he has written a book, it's very thick, but he's written a book on becoming children of God. He takes that part of the gospel, of the prologue, becoming children of God, and he goes through the entire Gospel of John. I know that there were times I don't agree with everything he says, but it has been such a spiritual blessing to follow with my Bible and go through his book, Becoming Children of God. It just, I have to share that because it's just a recent experience that I've had. And there's, of course, many other books on the Gospel of John that have been a blessing to me over the years. But having just finished that and the call that it is to say, how am I taking this book seriously? How am I acting in ways that can become a child of God, that's following this amazing Jesus who is the face of God in this world? I've just found it a huge blessing.
Thank you very much. You just told me that at this very time you read and you write for a series of devotionals.
Yes.
Week of prayer, I think.
Correct.
In Europe, at Newbold College, yeah?
That's right. It's coming up in September, and that's my summer project. So I'm doing a lot in the Gospel of John this summer.
Wonderful. By the time when this interview will be aired, that will be past.
Oh, really? Okay, you work far in advance. Good for you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wish you many continuous blessing in the study and the teaching of the Word of God, especially John. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and all the best in your ministry.
Thank you. Vă mulțumesc pentru participare. Cred că ați fost îmbogățiți spiritual și intelectual și sper de asemenea că și eu și dumneavoastră vom lua foarte în serios aceste recomandări de la sfârșit, de a începe să ținem un jurnal de studiu și să folosim metode simple care să ne ajute să evidențiem temele principale, ideile și cuvintele care revin și care transmit un mesaj pe care nu trebuie să îl ignorăm. Studiu cu folos al Evangheliei după Ioan, acum și întotdeauna.